8 o'clock, this is the UK Tonight. Coming up, an overhaul of police strip search policy following a Sky News investigation. Our findings prompted a damning review of Greater Manchester Police, with officers accused of unnecessary strip searches, some involving victims of sexual assault. We'll have a special report from our home editor, Jason Farrell. Also ahead tonight, farmers are preparing for a day of action in Westminster. Thousands are expected at a rally outside Downing Street tomorrow over plans to impose inheritance tax on farms. I'll be speaking to one farmer whose father took his own life earlier this month. He says stress over the family finances was to blame. Plus, council housing crisis. We go inside the flat in East London where years of mould have made a woman and her children ill. And I'll talk all things rugby and podcasting with former England flanker James Haskell. He'll be here in the studio a little later. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. First tonight, Greater Manchester Police is ending its use of strip searches in almost all circumstances after a damning report into the force's treatment of women and girls. The review, led by the former Victims Commissioner, was prompted by an investigation by our home editor Jason Farrell and his team Liz Lane and Sarah O'Connell. The Mayor of Greater Manchester has welcomed these changes, and the force says it's working hard to ensure women and girls have confidence in their police service. But many victims remain unconvinced. We should warn you that this report coming up from Jason contains some content that you may find distressing.
Sophie was in an abusive relationship.
He punched me, put his hands around my throat, thumbs in my eyes, and wouldn't let me leave the house. I just thought I'm probably going to end up in a grave at some point.
After this incident, she reported her partner and he was arrested and charged. But 6 weeks later, the police turn up at Sophie's door at 3 a.m. She's taken to this police station and left in a cell for 11 hours. Why? Because her abusive partner made counter-allegations, accusing her of breaking the wing mirror on his car and hurting his arm at a time when he'd strangled her.
They knew what I'd gone through. They knew what I was trying to protect myself from. I was in regular contact with domestic violence support workers who were meeting with police liaison. They knew that I'd had the locks changed. They knew I had an alert on the house and my phone.
Sophie's case became part of a review published in July this year into the practices of Greater Manchester Police, which found the reasons for her arrest were unreasonable.
One of them was that she had bruised his arms on the day when he tried to strangle her. And I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if someone tried to strangle me, I'd probably bruise his arms as well.
Dame Vera said the arrest was unlawful and was astonished the custody sergeant authorised it.
He wrote that her arrest was necessary to protect a vulnerable person. This was the police-designated highly violent domestic violence perpetrator. I imagine that you're as bewildered by now as I am.
I raised this with the Chief Constable.
What we're essentially hearing from Dame Vera here is that the police are being used by a domestic abuser to abuse that woman. That's what happened, isn't it? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I'm appalled by it. I'm appalled by it. I am a professional police officer, and I am surrounded by thousands of good police officers who will simply and similarly be appalled.
There were a lot of people involved in that arrest, and they all got it wrong.
Indeed. It's a systemic failure, a leadership failure, a process failure. I do think in individual circumstances there may be a failure of experience.
The Baird inquiry was prompted by a Sky News investigation into the treatment of women in custody, which showed officers abusing their powers, including unlawful arrests and strip searches. Today, an update from the Mayor's office says GMP has ended so-called welfare strip searches, and an independent scrutiny panel will look at arrests and custody records, and an independent custody visitor will make unannounced visits.
There is significant progress, particularly the ending of strip searches. That is a big deal, and I would like to see that implemented across England and Wales. We have done some real soul searching here. We've come up with some big changes, but we will never be complacent, and we will continue to monitor all of the issues that your reports raised and that Dame Vera recommended.
But questions remain. After the Baird review was published, Sophie made a formal complaint about her treatment, but GMP's complaint system told her the service provided by the police was acceptable. Only when she told them she was part of the Baird inquiry did they reverse this.
That is why I am so pleased that Andy Burnham is going to have a scrutiny panel to look and see how complaints are being done now. Have we made a change? Was this the old regime? And now we can look forward to some sunny uplands.
GMP told us complaints, including Sophie's, are subject to a fair and thorough examination by professional standards, and where there's a case to answer, officers will face disciplinary proceedings. But Sophie's one of several complainants we've spoken to who say the police still don't recognise their own failings.
I wouldn't just be OK with reporting something now. I would look at the consequences of me doing that and what could happen to me as a result of that and how they might treat me.
No officer has been disciplined yet as a result of the Baird inquiry. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, Jason is here with me in the studio, and Jason, you and your team have been working tirelessly on this, and this is a big moment today for GMP to make this change. Let's go back to the start and talk about welfare strip searches, which were particularly affecting women who were taken into custody.
Yeah, it was basically anyone who they felt might be thinking about harming themselves. But the very first person we featured was a woman called Zaina Iman, and there were pictures of her being taken into the custody suite naked, stripped naked rather, when she was taken in. And she was, unconscious at the time. You see images here of her arrest. She was arrested for knocking the glasses off a police officer. And she clearly taken a substance, and she was high. But then when she goes into the cell, she's unconscious. And she says, well, how did that help my welfare to take all my clothes off and leave me there with nothing? And she was left in the cell. And then obviously she had concerns because some of the footage went missing, and she complained that she had actually
She really had to fight hard to get this, didn't she?
And she had to fight a long time. And then 2 hours of the footage was missing, even the footage that she was given. She had complained that she had been sexually assaulted in the cell. And so there's a real concern about that, and that still hasn't been answered. That's still been looked at by the IOPC, and Zaina is still concerned about that, and she feels there are still people who are going through the experiences that she has. But I think what is really significant is that they have said we're not going to do these welfare searches anymore. Andy Burnham was very clear on this, as was Kate Green, who's the deputy mayor, who's come in and said, actually, what Dame Vera is saying is it doesn't help. You don't need to take someone's clothes off to protect them. There are other ways of doing that. You can monitor them, and actually, by stripping them, you can add to their trauma, especially if there's someone who's come into the custody suite who may be the victim of a sexual offence. They may be a domestic violence victim. We had another case of a domestic violence victim who turned up at the police cell, at the police, to try and meet the man who she had been abused by to get the keys back to her house. And then she ended up being strip searched because she'd sworn at the police, basically, and they then decided she was concealing a vape. It's an utterly ridiculous situation, and these were all pointed out by Dame Vera. And again, when it comes to searching for a concealed item, that will only be done as a last resort. So you wouldn't expect the police to do that again for a woman who they think might be concealing a vape, because it's just not serious enough.
For women and girls going to the police, there is a big issue of trust. And I know that from some of the women you've spoken to since this announcement was made about welfare searches not happening anymore, the women you've spoken to said, actually, does it make us feel any safer? Probably not. But Dame Vera Baird and her team have come up with sort of recommendations and ways of, holding the police to account, a new complaint system, an oversight panel, better training. Can you talk to us a bit about that? Because it all sounds good, but actually, when it comes to women going to the police, do they feel any safer? There's a lot of...
Well, look, I think there are really good kind of concepts in here if they get put into place. So the training, for example, you mentioned, so that police can better recognise domestic violence victims and deal with them in the correct way. Having female custody staff there who can deal with female people who are detained. They have, for example, dignity packs now. We had examples of women who were kept in cells for hours on end when they were on their period and had no way of getting hold of any sanitary products. Those will now be provided as standard when they go in. So these are big, these will change the experiences of people going in. But the problem is, I think, at the moment, is as you point out, the complaint system. As you heard there in that report with Sophie, she went through the Baird review. This is staggering, really, because Dame Vera Baird, as she said in that report, was flabbergasted by what had happened to her. And you heard the chief inspector saying, he was appalled by it, and any officer would be appalled. And yet the inspectorate team, when the complaint was made after the Baird review, found that she had had an acceptable service from the police, that the arrest was justified. So if the complaint system can look at that situation that any other person would look at and say, no, that was unacceptable, what happened to you, and come to that conclusion, then there has to be a problem. And if the complaint system doesn't pull out the problems, then who is pulling out the problems? Now, Vera Baird is talking about the scrutiny panel that will look at unlawful arrests, and there will be people looking at the practices within custodies as well. So that is an extra layer of scrutiny. However, it's not changing the complaint system as a whole, which I think people do recognise as flawed.
OK, Jason, thank you. Jason Farrell there, our home editor, with that special report tonight. Thank you, Jason. Now, thousands of farmers are expected in central London tomorrow to protest against the government's proposed changes to inheritance tax. Rachel Reeves announced in her budget last month that farmers will soon have to pay a 20% tax rate on any business worth more than £1 million. The government insists small family farms will not be affected, with the Prime Minister defending the plans once again at the G20 in Brazil.
Look, I do understand that it's causing concern, but if you take a typical case of a couple wanting to pass a family farm down to one of their children, which would be a very typical example, with all of the thresholds in place, that's £3 million before any inheritance tax is paid. And that's why I'm confident that the vast majority of farms and farmers will not be affected at all by that aspect of the budget. They will be affected by the £5 billion that we're putting into farming, and I'm very happy to work with farmers on that.
Well, farmers argue the government doesn't know its own figures, and data from DEFRA suggests 2/3 of farm businesses are worth more than the £1 million threshold. Ahead of tomorrow's protest, I've spoken to Jonathan Charlesworth. His father, Philip, took his own life 3 weeks ago. And Jonathan believes his despair over the family's financial future was a key reason.
Well, my dad, Philip, obviously, when he passed away in tragic circumstances just over 2 weeks ago now at 78. I don't think he missed much of a day's work in his life up until then. He was born into farming. He was farming through and through. It was brought up as a child with my granddad on the farm, and then when he took over in the 80s, he built it up, built a big pig unit on the farm, added more land to the farm. The last sort of 10, 15 years I've been running the farm, but he's still had a hand in it. Like I say, he's pretty much worked every day of his life until my mum became ill with dementia. So the last 5 years or so he's been caring primarily for my mum, but he's still been able to sneak out whenever he can and do little bits and pieces. And a very sad loss to both us, but the general community as well.
What's the realities of running a farm? Because you say you never missed a day's work, because there's plenty of work to do.
Oh, there is. I mean, we work 7 days a week. My dad worked 7 days a week, very few holidays. I mean, I don't remember going on holiday a lot as a kid. If I did, I'd tend to go with my grandparents. But 7 days a week, it still is. I think, if I look at myself now, I think the last time I had a week's holiday was probably about 13 years ago.
Because, Jonathan, the myth is all farmers are rich, but in reality, profits these days are small. Many farmers find themselves in debt. And on paper, your dad was asset rich.
Yeah,
he owned a big farm.
we're asset rich and cash poor.
But day to day, he earned less than the minimum wage.
I mean, the farm last year made 15,000. And we're working 50, 60 hours a week, probably on average, 7 days a week, with the odd day off here and there. But even if a day off, we work before we go and we work when we get back.
People will listen to this and go, I get this.
Yeah.
I run a farm. The National Farmers Union say there is increasing financial pressure on farmers because of high costs, record inflation, low farm returns and persistent bad weather. Then came word to the farming community, including your dad, Philip, that there was going to be a change to inheritance tax in the new government's budget. What kind of effect did that have on your dad? Well,
the last sort of 6 weeks, couple of months before the budget came out, it was the only topic of conversation. First week we spoke about on a morning, probably the last thing we spoke about on an evening. Before we sort of parted ways for the evening, it was just budget, how are we going to manage it, what's going to come in, how big is this, what's the tax burden going to be? Nobody knew. When my dad went, he obviously left a note, and the last thing he'd done under the note was a scribblings of how we could possibly pay this tax bill. Little notes, solicitor need to ask this, need to ask that, question mark, question mark, question mark. Must have been what was going through his head that pushed him over the edge. If we'd been lumped with a couple 100,000 or more inheritance tax, there's just no way we could have paid it. We couldn't have borrowed that sort of money. There was just absolutely no way without going out and going out and working somewhere else to pay it. I don't know. There's just absolutely no way we could have paid it.
And in your dad's mind, he's working 60-hour weeks for not very much money because he knows that this farm is his legacy. He's handing it down to you. This is a family business. He's not in it to earn lots of money. He's in it for the love of farming and the hope that it will go to you.
I don't think any of us are in it to make a fortune. It'd be nice if we did, but we're there to farm. We want to farm well. We want to look after our animals well, produce a product. We want to improve the product we produce, whether that be livestock or crops. I think every farmer wants to leave it slightly better than the last generation.
How do you feel about the fact that you're pretty certain you knew what the key reason for your dad choosing to take his own life, because he was under enormous pressure and he wanted to do right by you in terms of, if that inheritance tax didn't come in, he saw it coming in the future and he hoped that you would be a beneficiary rather than being punished money-wise. How do you feel? We're, not 3 weeks on from his death, but I just want to get a sense of how you're feeling.
Well, angry, really. I mean, there was so much hype around it. I think if there'd been some information put out there so we actually knew what might be coming, so we knew what we'd be working around, everybody was fairly certain this
Everybody feeling pretty stressed?
Yeah, and I mean, it was stressed anyway from caring for my mum, which was another way, really, because with dementia, if she'd gone into a home, that could have eaten away at the farm, because, that's 50,000 a year or whatever in care costs. We've kept her at home as long as we possibly could, not just because, obviously, we want her at home, but, it's always at the back of your mind if she goes into care, and, the government can take that out of the assets as well, and then double whammy, it's inheritance tax comes in, and, I don't know, it just seems to kill ambition, I think. Yeah. What's the point in having an ambition if the government's just going to take it away? What's
the future of farming then? Because who is going to go into farming with it in this state? And how can families survive? Because British farming survives because those farms are passed down through generations. As you said, it's a love for farming.
It isn't. But also the knowledge. I mean, I've been learning since I was 2, 3 year old, probably, certainly from 5 years old. I've been out there hands-on, and I've been to agricultural college and I've learnt a lot there, but a lot of what I learnt came from my dad and my granddad. And that, you're brought up doing it, you're learning on the job, and there's more to it than just looking after animals. You've got to be an electrician, an accountant, a plumber, a welder. When something goes wrong, you need to be able to mend it, and you can neither afford to bring a tradesman in or have the time to wait for them to come a lot of the time. And a lot of that you pick up as a youngster that being brought up by your parents.
Well, the government don't comment on individual circumstances, but they have sent their condolences to your family. And I wonder what, with the farmers coming to London to talk to their MPs and to show the government just how difficult this is making life for them, I wonder what you could say to the Prime Minister if you could sit down with him and explain to him what help you actually need if it is not this.
Well, I'm not sure he'd listen.
Is that how you feel, that they're not listening to you?
I don't think they understand the agricultural industry one little bit. You know, I think...
The Chancellor's husband works in that department.
He works in that department, he doesn't work in farming. I don't think... I think the DEFRA department is probably nearly as removed from farming as the government is, or certainly part... Don't get me wrong, there's some very good people in DEFRA, so I'm not going to tar them all with the same brush, but...
But they don't get it and they're not listening. So what would you say to him if he is listening?
I think he should come and spend a week working on a farm. You know, see what goes off on a family farm. Be up at, 4 or 5 in the morning, come back for milking at 7 o'clock at night and do that for 7 or 8 days a week and then see what, and then does he still then think we're not classed as the working people that he's standing up for?
Well, we did ask the government to respond to Jonathan's family's situation. They told us that their thoughts and condolences are with Philip's family following his tragic death. And a reminder, if you have been affected by the issues raised in this story, help is available from the Samaritans 24 hours a day. You can call 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org, and we'll have full coverage of tomorrow's protest live here on Sky News, and we'll have a special edition of the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock. Still to come on the UK Tonight, our council flat is making us ill. We'll meet the mother and her children living with a barely believable mould problem.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
Sí.
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
Sí.
This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us. Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news.
We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
Sky News, the full story first. Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the Beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
The government may have promised the biggest growth in social house building in a generation, but there is a major challenge to make current housing habitable before any new homes are built. Sky News has been speaking to a mother in East London whose council flat is in such a bad condition that it is making her children sick. And whilst the local council has apologised, it's a problem being faced by tenants in social housing up and down the country. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson has this story.
This is Waltham Forest in East London, a place with one of the longest waiting lists for council housing in the country. Thousands are desperate for a flat in blocks like these. But we've been inside and found a snapshot of Britain's housing crisis.
You got this?
Yeah.
You don't want to touch the damp?
It's cold and mouldy in this flat. The damage has been caused by a persistent leak. It's been like this for 8 years.
That is the girls' room. At the bottom is all mouldy. So the paint has come off. We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
For years, they've been begging the council to fix it. Life like this is all her daughters can remember.
They grow up watching this grow with them as well. Do you know how sad that is?
I can't breathe that much.
Since a baby?
Yeah, since a baby.
When I see news that someone's died because they're breathing, it scares me, and I think of my kids at that point. But then I sit there and I think, but who's there to help me? I've got no one to help me. Do you want a jumper?
They feel trapped, as before moving in here, they were homeless.
Where am I going to go? They want us to live in hell, that's what it is. They want us to live in misery.
This is when it's, like, really bad. It was like,
water just pouring in.
Yeah.
That's how Ahmed felt too when water poured in through his ceiling on and off for a year, forcing him to turn off the electricity for weeks at a time.
Just coming out of these areas here, just completely seeping out, and it would come directly down to the switches. But the worst part is that it could go through the actual piping, so it would go on the inside without us seeing it at all. So switching it on was just a complete hazard.
An NHS worker, Andrea, who's disabled, sometimes struggles to get to her flat on the 11th floor.
The lifts is the biggest nightmare. I've had to spend a couple of nights not here because I couldn't get in there.
How often do they break down?
Too often.
Earlier this year, flammable cladding was removed from the buildings, but it hasn't yet been replaced, so they've been left with no insulation.
It's freezing, you know. So throughout Christmas, we're just, you know, literally left to freeze. The scariest winter we're going to have to go through living in these buildings.
Balcony walls have had to be removed too. Some, like Steve on the 5th floor, have been left with just a flimsy barrier.
This is the gap that leaves in between.
Are you worried about your children when they're out on the balcony?
Well, definitely. I can't let them come out here. This is a no-go.
Waltham Forest Council insists the work is being carried out safely. They are, however, unable to say when the buildings will be re-insulated. They say they respond to concerns in a timely manner and they apologise to Faz, saying they'll arrange an urgent inspection of her flat.
I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my two girls. Then I feel like maybe they will take this serious.
Residents feel ignored, but the severe housing shortage means they have no other options. The government has made social house building a key priority, but the experience of people here raises questions about whether existing homes are fit for purpose. Becky Johnson, Sky News, East London.
Well, I want to pick up on that final point that Becky Johnson made there in her report with Susanna Mooner, Secretary of the Social Housing Action Campaign. Susanna, good of you to join us tonight. Just listening to what Becky said at the end there, I mean, the government have said, and I'll quote them here, they're committed to the biggest growth in social and affordable housing in a generation, which sounds good. We do need more social housing, but we also need, as Becky Johnson's report shows there, to make good on the housing that's already available.
That's absolutely right. I think that was the most powerful point made in the film, really, is that the focus is on house building. And what we're going to see is a continuation of the neglect of the condition of housing that already exists. And for years now, we've been, hearing these stories. These stories are coming out about terrible, terrible disrepairs. But there's so little focus on that now. When the regulator recently published a report which said that around 13,000 social housing homes fail the decent home standard and are not up to the decent home standard. 5,200 of those are exempted from the decent home standard, so they don't even have to be brought up, even to that very basic standard of living that makes a home habitable. And we think there needs to be a lot more focus on actually making sure that the homes that people are in are habitable, because they not only does it destroy people's lives. I mean, we heard the terrible stories in your report there, but it also costs the NHS a huge amount of money. For example, it's such a waste of human lives and of money when it comes to not keeping the homes in good repair.
Susanna, the residents of that block of flats, they're absolutely desperate. And that's just one block of flats. There are hundreds more up and down the country in the same state of disrepair. Uninhabitable, really. Yeah. Faz Begum there and her girls in Becky's report, something that struck me was when she said, I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my girls for someone to actually do something about this. But we have had tragedies like that before. We've had Grenfell, and, there are tower blocks without insulation now because the cladding's been taken off and not replaced, so people are going to be really cold this winter. We've had young Awab Ishak, the little boy who died because of mould in his social housing. So these bad things have already happened, but nothing seems to have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to ask yourself what is missing here, and where the gap is with enforcement. The laws that say that if a landlord is charging rent, they have to provide housing of a decent standard. So, it has to be habitable. So the laws are there, but it's very, very difficult for tenants and residents to actually be able to enforce that law. There is no agency that exists at the moment that can come in on any kind of, with any kind of speed where a home is in a state of dilapidation and order the landlord to put it right and force the landlord to do that if they don't do it within a timely manner. What happens instead is you have to go through the internal complaint system, then you need to go to the ombudsman or take a case to the court. All of that takes a huge amount of time. And when you do end up in court, you're sitting on one side with, either self-representing or with a no-win, no-fee lawyer, or, maybe having found some free legal advice somewhere, because you can't get legal aid for a lot of these cases. And on the other side, the landlord turns up with a handful of solicitors, their full-time staff, working in their legal team, a barrister able to help them. So they are able generally to run rings around the tenants and residents. It's very, very difficult for people to actually go in and get any kind of enforcement. And it can't be left to individuals, as we saw with Grenfell, as we saw with Awab Ishak, and we see every day with all of these tragedies. There was a story earlier last week about a woman who climbed out onto her roof ledge and fell to her death. She was just 37 years old, but her guttering had been fixed with sort of sticky tape by her landlord, Hackney Council. And she was so fed up with the damp and mould that it was causing to have the leaks come in that she tried to fix it herself. And we aren't going to see an end to these stories until we really get some proper enforcement in place. We need to build that tenant and resident power, but we also need to see action from government on the enforcement side, not just on the legislation.
Yeah. Hackney Council aren't here to respond to that story. I should just point that out. But Susanna, a final point. Is this just blatant discrimination for people who are in social housing? Because, again, we're hearing in Becky's report people feeling that they don't have a voice. The attitude appears to be, you're lucky you've got this house or this flat. There's nowhere else for you. And we, again, heard that in the report into Grenfell. The residents of Grenfell kept trying to talk about the fact that their building was unsafe and nobody listened.
Yeah, I think it's the tenants and residents who don't have a voice. And I think that extends way beyond just the social housing tenants and residents, although they tend not to have a lot of other resources that might be available to people to try and get justice when they have a housing problem. But private landlords are just as bad. Maybe those stories don't hit the headlines as much because people maybe there is a perception that actually social housing should be in better condition. We don't expect social landlords to be providing substandard housing, and therefore it seems even more shocking. And maybe that's why those stories tend to hit the headlines a bit more. But unfortunately, I have to say that at SHAC, we get, plenty of complaints from people who are living in, private, fully private rented accommodation as much as we do from the social tenants and residents. It's still very, very hard for them to enforce their rights. What's likely to happen is that a private tenant who agitates about, conditions of disrepair is likely just to be hit with a no-fault eviction. They're just likely to be evicted by their landlord. So in some ways, they're very, very vulnerable as well. I think in a lot of ways, we want to see an end to that kind of division between the different tenancy types, between the different landlord types. We think there need to be standards that just apply to everybody, that everybody should have access to justice and to decent housing.
Susanna Mee, really good to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much for coming on to react to Becky Johnson's report there. That's Susanna Mee, Secretary of the Social Housing Action Campaign. Thank you. As to come on the programme tonight, why campaigners fear government mismanagement could mean a once-in-a-generation opportunity is missed on the laws surrounding assisted dying. The Prime Minister insists the government will remain neutral in the debate over assisted dying, despite several interventions from the Health Secretary. Wes Streeting has made his opposition clear and ordered a review on the potential cost to the NHS. And there are deeper questions over how the law would be implemented, questions that won't be answered before MPs vote on the issue. That's left campaigners fearing that a once-in-a-generation opportunity could be lost. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
There was an edict from the Cabinet Secretary to discuss it with constituents, but not really to air views. That hasn't happened. There is a sense at the heart of government, I think, that they've lost a bit of control when it comes to the assisted dying debate. Indeed, there are some that believe that actually the government has embarked on an unwise course and is making a mistake by doing what it's doing and how it's doing it. Let me explain, Mark. What's going on is that the government has ensured that there's parliamentary time for a backbencher, which is Kim Leadbeater, to put forward legislation off their own back to legalise assisted dying. So it's not part of the government's agenda per se. It is a backbench motion, and then MPs are being allowed to vote as they want. But what that has meant in practice is in the increasing spectacle, as we had during the Brexit years, of red-on-red attacks. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, really pulled the pin out of the grenade on this one last week, where he ordered a review into the costs of assisted dying and reiterated his opposition to it. Other figures, as you say, like Bridget Phillipson coming out against. It looks as if Angela Rayner is going to come out against. There are now people in Downing Street who are not against the subject of assisted dying. They're not against the measure in principle coming into law, but they wouldn't be upset if this legislation ended up falling in the Commons when it comes to a vote a week on Friday, just because the manner in which it's being introduced is causing so much, it's dominating so much the airwaves. It is distracting from Labour's focus on the economy and on borders. I even understand from multiple sources that Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, wouldn't be upset if this legislation died in a week's time, because if it doesn't, if it's continued, if MPs authorise it into next year, we're going to be spending a lot of time both on the detail of assisted dying and on the politics, the red-on-red politics of it, just as it makes its way slowly through the various bits of the parliamentary procedure. And then if it does get through Parliament, there are big questions then for government. Is the service provided by an arm of the NHS? How much will that cost? What will that mean can no longer happen? Who are the judges that have to oversee this service for people who do want to end their life, who have a terminal illness? Even though the government tried to push this off to backbenchers and make it a free vote, there are so many questions which ministers still have to answer. It's actually becoming quite uncomfortable, which is why some people would be quite happy if this subject just quietly went away.
British police are offering a £10,000 reward for information about a father and son who disappeared in Spain 5 years ago. Our correspondent Alice Porter is following this story for us today. Alice, this disappearance did happen 5 years ago, so it's worth reminding viewers the background to this case.
Yes, so this is a father and son. This is Danny and Liam Paul, and they went on holiday to Malaga 5 years ago. They arrived on the 29th of March in 2019. They hired a car, a grey Peugeot, and they were next seen the following day on the 1st of April. And they have never been seen from again. The car was found abandoned and their passport was found at the hotel. And this has sparked a huge manhunt in Spain to find out more information and to try and locate them. But we've now heard from police. They are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. That's DCI Simon Dunn. He's really urging the public to come forward with any information.
They'd gone over there for a holiday and there was no intention from either of them to go anywhere further beyond Spain, Estepona. They were due to fly back within a few days. They had numerous daily contact with their families back in the UK, and that all simply stopped. So those circumstances, again, along with finding their clothes, their passports and essentially an untouched hotel room, would lead to the suspicion that foul play was involved.
Well, Alice, why the renewed interest now, 5 years on?
Well, Spanish police have been leading the investigation over the last 5 years. That has now been taken over by Surrey and Sussex Police Major Crime Team. They've now taken over as lead investigators, and so they have put forward this £10,000 money, really asking for anyone with any information to come forward. And if that information proves to be useful in terms of arresting and charging somebody, then they may well be able to have that money. But it's clearly a move by the police to reignite this in the public view, really. I mean, since the last couple of years, this has been treated as a murder investigation, so it's worth pointing out that's very much how the police are seeing this at the moment. And, of course, at the heart of this is a family where a father and a brother went on holiday and have never come back. And the son, Liam, he's a sibling. He's got 2 siblings. And it's obviously just devastating for the family. This has gone on for 5 years and no answers yet.
OK. Alice, thank you, Alice Porter, following that story for us this evening. So to come here on the UK Tonight, a statue in honour of England hero Harry Kane has finally found a home. We'll bring you the details. And joining us in the studio, rugby's Renaissance man James Haskell, the flanker turned DJ, author and podcaster, pontificates on England and his new book.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a 5th Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News, get the full story first.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Now, it's been a busy month of autumn rugby internationals with home nations battling against the best of the Southern Hemisphere. And if you are an England fan, or Wales for that matter, hasn't been a fun few weeks, has it? But one man who definitely won't be letting it get him down is our next guest, James Haskell. As well as enjoying an incredibly successful career playing for Wasps, England and the British and Irish Lions, he is now a DJ, broadcaster, author and host of a hugely popular podcast. You might have heard of it, The Good, Bad and the Rugby. He's alongside our sports editor, Nick Powell, here as well. What an introduction that was.
I know, it's unbelievable.
You're busy, aren't you? Busier than when you were playing rugby.
It was much longer than mine. I was laughing at myself. I was like, what have you left off the list I could possibly add to that?
I'm sure next time you're in, there'll be something
else in there as well. Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins. Like 1 minute I'm a chimney sweep, next minute I'm a street painter. Oh, never mind.
So you have got a book out based on your hugely successful podcast, The Good, the Bad and the Rugby, Unleashed. I called it a Christmas annual to you earlier on.
Yes, you did. I was very insulted.
Why? Great stocking filler, Christmas annuals, a roundup of the year.
Even that's stocking filler. SJ, why have I come on this programme to be abused in such a way?
I mean, that's the nature of your podcast. So don't pretend you're not used to it.
True.
Right, so there's everything on that podcast. Yes. You don't leave, any stone unturned. There's nothing you can't say. So I'm quite interested that the title of this book is Unleashed.
Yes.
What more could be said that isn't said on your podcast?
Well, it was actually, it's got the same title as Boris Johnson's book as well, which is slightly concerning. Because we've had parties, but we had permission and it was definitely okay. The idea about the book was kind of, we've had this mad journey where it's kind of we've really captured the zeitgeist of kind of that podcasting moment where kind of people really adopted it. Of all the things I've ever done, people come up to me wherever I am, whatever country I am, and always say, we love the podcast. I kind of think it's brought three guys together that were mates-ish, but have become really good friends. We've had sort of births, retirements, marriages, separation. We had it all on there, as well as some pretty mad court case we had with our old podcast. We had loads of sort of incidents. We've had couple of World Cups, had some adventures. We've interviewed the royal family. All of it on the podcast.
That's got a bit of peak, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The royal family.
Yeah.
It was the Princess Royal and the Prince and Princess of Wales, because, of course, they're all presidents of rugby unions. And you all went to Windsor Castle, didn't you?
Yes, we did, yeah. Yeah, it was amazing.
I mean, Mike Tyndall's allowed in. I love that he smuggled the other two of you in. What was that like?
Incredible. I sort of had visions of being... I don't know where I got my history lessons from, but I imagine when I walked in, there'd be footmen with trays of food and, you know, like fine feasts and 18 crafted bird feasts, ostrich stuff. With the thing.
You and your food.
There was nothing. There was nothing. It took me an hour to get off with a cup of tea, so I was livid. I would have given it 3 stars on TripAdvisor. The tea was fantastic. But no, they were amazing.
Company was all right, though.
Company was OK. Yeah. I did get a crescent of biscuits. They weren't sort of top. I thought they weren't Fortnum and Mace or something like that. They were definitely family circle, but, you know... we can get. We get what you get. A couple of broken rich teas, who complains? But no, they were just amazing. It was nice to let us in. I did try to... there's glasses with a sort of royal seal on them, and I did try the half-inch one, but...
you could hide one
Princess
of those in
Royal
your hand.
said, we count these in and we count these out. We've seen your sort before. She basically dressed me down, so I was like, OK, put all that back. But, yeah, it was amazing. Look, the opportunity to go and talk to them, and they're such good advocates of sport and the importance of exercise. And I think if you look at, as a country as a whole, we've got a bit of an issue with obesity, we've got people a bit lost. One thing that doctors always recommend is either exercise or cooking to help with whatever you've got going on. And I think they really actively encourage people to get involved in sport, and they were so well informed. I mean, the Princess Royal knows more about sport than I could ever possibly think about. And she turned up with, like, notes and everything else. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to pretend I actually know something about rugby. And the Prince and Princess of Wales were just such good advocates, and it was really interesting their dynamic, how competitive they were. Yeah. It was literally like Monica and Chandler from Friends. They were never going to, literally, none of them would give in, you know?
Well, that's the good. Should we talk a bit about the bad? Because there was an England result at the weekend, 5th defeat in a row. Nick, I know you want to talk about that.
Well, I'm assuming that Steve Borthwick, the coach, is OK for now.
Yes.
But he has to deliver in the Six Nations, does he not?
Well, do you know what's really interesting? If you look at the Six Nations, I think the first game's away to Ireland.
And then home to France.
Then home to France, and then Scotland. So it's not going to be an easy start. I think, do you know what? I think Steve Borthwick's a brilliant coach. I think there's a lot of talent in there. I think they are, for the majority of the game, doing well, either up. Last 20 minutes, that game management, that ability to seal out a game is missing. And I think if you look at the defence, for me, that's probably the most worrying area, because we couldn't score tries for a period of time, and attack's actually what takes the longest time. Defence is normally a relatively quick fix. They've adopted this blitz defence, which they had working really well in the World Cup. Things have changed a little bit, and you can see, actually, I don't know whether it's individual errors or system errors in regards to what they're doing, but they're just not getting it quite right. But I think it's unfortunate when you manage England in whatever sport, you're in the spotlight, you're under the microscope, and the expectation is you have to do well. I do think, though, a lot of the teams that are now doing really well, if you look at Australia, and particularly New Zealand and South Africa, each one's had a period of time. You know, before Rassie Erasmus took on, they won 1 in 5 games. He's come on board, he's created an ultimate winning recipe. I do believe that Steve's the right man for the job, but it's going to take a bit of time. But unfortunately, in the fast-paced world of professional sport, are you given that luxury?
Well, you're not. Australia were a joke 6 months ago, and suddenly they're beating England, and now they've thrashed Wales, and now Warren Gatland at Wales is under enormous pressure.
I think Wales is the saddest story, really, because you know, it looks like they're just obviously all the rugby over there, whether it's the stuff with the regions, whether it's the stuff kind of with the national team, and I don't see there's any quick fixes. I think with England, it's not far away. I think with Wales, it's a bigger challenge to find the players to raise that standard.
Can I ask you, I mean, it's a bit rude to talk about another book when you're on to plug yours. I'll say it again, The Good, the Bad and the Rugby Unleashed. No, I've got nothing to write about.
Yes.
But Danny Care's had a book out, his autobiography, and it's creating a bit of a stir. He's your former England teammate. Yeah. He played under Eddie Jones, as did you. And I just want to read you a quote, because I'd be interested to get your perspective on this. He said about Eddie Jones, everyone was terrified of him. It was like living in a dictatorship under a despot who disappeared people. Essentially, he's painting a pretty toxic picture inside that England camp where people were fearful of Eddie Jones. Now, you played under him. He's been on your podcast. You know, is that the kind of atmosphere you recognise within that? Did you have a different experience?
Yeah.
You knew I was going to ask you a tricky question.
Yeah, no, I like it. No, I like it. No, I'm up for it. I think, look, first of all, Danny Care's a mate of mine. He's a brilliant guy, and you've always got to respect what other people said. I don't see any of that. I think Eddie Jones, for the first time in my professional career, particularly with England, created an environment that was aspirational, that was ruthless, that was competitive, that was honest, that was fun, and successful. He's got the best winning record of any England coach ever, bar not winning a World Cup better than Clive Woodward. He was ruthless with people. I think, unfortunately, you know, in life, for every good person, so every person that loves Eddie Jones and people that don't like him, I think, you know, you've got to understand that everyone experiences things differently, but I don't recognise any of that. I know Owen Slot was very, the journalist, very vocal in the Times about it, bullying. I didn't see it. I think professional sport is ruthless. I think sometimes you're told things you don't like. I think, unfortunately, everyone has an expectation that they are deserving of success and can achieve. And when someone turns around and says, you're not good enough, people take that quite hard. Now, I'm not saying that happened to Danny, but I know, for example, day one when Eddie came in, he stood at the front of the room at Penny Hill Park. When you're number 5 in the world, are you telling me that you're a team deserves to be at that level with the resources and talent? I'm going to take you to number 1 in the world, and I'm going to take you to a World Cup final, but I'm going to make you make sacrifices that you've never had to make before. And some people in this room aren't going to make it. Some of the coaches are not going to make it. Some of the physios, medical staff will not make it. But if you stick with me, it'll be fun. And after 3 weeks, I sat in a room with Dylan Hartley, Dan Cole, Owen Farrell, a load of lads, Ben Youngs, and I was like, oh my God, is this what international rugby's supposed to be like? Is this what a winning environment's like? Because I would have swapped the 50 caps I had when he came in to have had 50 more with him. I would have given up all of that to spend more time with him. But that was my experience.
All right, James, thank you very much for that. And Nick, we've just got a time to squeeze in a little bit of sport, have we?
Well, more sport, yes, some football tonight's important as well.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Firstly, how do you reflect on the decision that England made to retire you effectively earlier on this year?
Yeah, obviously I've made peace with it now. A lot of time's passed, but it was tough at the time. You know, I was coming into that summer thinking I still had a lot to give, a lot to offer the team. I still felt I was fit and playing well. So when it did come as quite a shock at first, but yeah, I feel like I'm the sort of person that probably would have kept playing until I was 50 if I...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
That's all from the UK tonight. As ever, you can catch up on the highlights on our webpage. We are back tomorrow night at 8. We have a special edition of the UK Tonight for you from the farmers' protest in central London. Coming up next, it's The World. Stay tuned.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.